the big boys of the world, and here I'm speaking about Donald Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin, have decided they're doing a sort of a makeup and trying to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. And guess what? They've decided to keep Zelensky out of all this. So what's the message? They're just telling Zelensky, by the way, you're not a big boy. In this league, you're not a big boy. You're an errands boy, and that is how we shall treat you. And that is exactly how they have treated him this week. So the U.S. President Donald Trump has called the Ukrainian president a dictator without elections, and has actually asked him to better move fast, or he's not going to have any country left to govern. So the remarks from Trump came after the Ukrainian leader claimed that the U.S. president is living in a Russian disinformation bubble. So this back and forth has been going on, and it's clear at this moment that the U.S., through, of course, the presidency, that is through Trump, is done with Ukraine. And I don't know how Zelensky plans to deal with this, even though he's trying to fight for his space. But clearly, from the way Trump is speaking, this, in my opinion, is a done deal. So Zelensky claims that came following after Trump claimed that Ukraine was to blame for the Russia's 2022 invasion remarks. Up to date, Ukraine does not accept that it was their mistake. On the other hand, Russia do not agree that they are the aggressors. So it's everyone fights for their side. But the most interesting thing is that now the U.S. president saying that the attack was initiated by Ukraine. So from that already, Zelensky is starting to feel the pressure and the heat. So the comments are an indication. This you don't even need to think about, that no more future aid from U.S. to Ukraine. And Mark, remember that Zelensky has previously said that Ukraine had little chance of survival without support from the U.S., who have been their key military partner. In all this time that this war has been going on, actually the U.S. has been the biggest funder, followed by Germany. So if the U.S. withdraws from this, withdraw the funding, withdraw military support, it means Zelensky has no point. And that's why we are seeing him trying to get his space in the EU space. However, I don't think EU has the willingness that the former president of U.S. had, because all this support went because former President Joe Biden had decided to put in resources, put in human resource, weaponry, money, all this aid, just so that the Ukraine could probably beat Russia in this war. But of course, that went on. He got out of office, and that has not happened. And now Trump comes in, and Trump is not happy. Remember, Trump is now calling Zelensky a dictator. And this is amid of now what people are citing, or experts are citing, as irreconcilable rift. Trump has also added that Zelensky has done a terrible job and has accused the Ukrainian president, without any evidence, of course, that he's been benefiting from the continuing U.S. financial and military support. And this was more from a personal perspective, because the way the world is structured, the essence of war is to make money. So the end goal is usually to make money or deals, whichever deals that result into money. So I feel like Trump has gotten to a point, he's looking at it and he feels we've just been putting in money, we've been putting our resources, and there's no value that we are getting as the United States. So with that, he's just decided we are not doing this. And then he's accusing Zelensky of having squandered the money that he was given. So he's even suggested that Zelensky has interest in prolonging the war rather than seeking it to end, so that he can make more money. And in essence, according to Donald Trump, Zelensky has been playing the US. That's basically it. So Trump dismissed Zelensky as a modestly successful comedian. I think Ukrainians hate this, but it's a tag they use because their president, of course, is a former comedian. So Trump said that this is a modest comedian. So essentially what he says, this guy might still be acting. And he says that he talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion USD just to go into war that couldn't be won, and that in the first place, this war should never have started. So you see, this is a place where Trump is trying to say, you wasted America, you were lied to, or you lied to Biden. And you know, oftentimes Trump dismisses Biden so many times. So it's a thing of contempt. Like, we got into this as the US for no good reason. And the only thing that he cites was good, was playing Biden like a fiddle. Trump wrote basically that Zelensky was Aaron's boy. This is just pure contempt, and it's evidence. And I think if Zelensky is looking for anything else, in my opinion, I feel it is the right time for this war to end, and he better shape in, or else decisions will be made just like they were made for the meeting and he was left out. The next thing, decisions are going to be made, and eventually he's going to be at a loss, or even Ukraine rather will be at a loss. Something else that Trump hit Zelensky with is that he's saying his rating, according to opinion polls, it's at 4%. Of course, this is, Zelensky has argued that another poll was carried out, and he's now, I think, at 57, but Trump says the approval is at 4%, meaning if Ukrainians don't trust him, according to Trump, at 4%, it's a waste of time. And you see now, if you're at 4% and you're at war, it means people don't trust you. On the other hand, Ukrainians are saying, no, we trust our president. He moved from, I think, 53 to 56. So there's a progress in trust. So you see, when you start doing this back and forth and focusing on polls, when essentially you should be trying to work out towards peace, then you're missing out the point. And it's very sad for a sitting president to do that when there is war going on. So President Putin, of course, on the other hand, was not quiet about it. According to him, he said that the president had begun receiving, he was saying that President Trump has started receiving what they call objective information about the war in Ukraine that has led him to change his position. Basically, Putin is saying, there were so many barriers in between. Of course, even him, he dismissed President Biden. So he says that maybe Biden was driving an agenda, but now he's at a point where he has President Trump, who's becoming more objective because he's getting the right information. So that's where we are. Earlier this week, senior U.S. and Russian officials met in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday to discuss the war in Ukraine. And the meeting also focused on economic, political cooperation between Russia, indicating a significant shift approach, of course, to Moscow. Interestingly, Trump's and Putin's people that were in this meeting, they excluded Ukraine and Europe from the talks. So, and this has not gone well with Zelensky. Of course, he's been crying everywhere again and going to beg now in Europe and asking them to put in more money. But I think Europe will not. If you look at the interests, Europe will not put in more money to fund a war that essentially does not add value to them. Because every time you go to war, you really need to be thoughtful of what value it is. So if Europe goes to war with, decides to fund them, so for what value will they get from Ukraine? And they're already trading partners, nothing more. So in my opinion, I feel Zelensky is left with very few spaces where he has to beg, because he's been the begging. I mean, he's posted himself as the poster child for begging in this world. Because what we've never seen, we've never seen President Putin going to beg to be supported by anyone. If anything, Russia was sanctioned by European Union, by the US, and still this guy survived. So I feel that this peace deal, even though Ukraine is looking, and basically even European Union is now afraid that Trump will not be a good mediator, or if he's a mediator, of course, now that he promised at the beginning, remember during his campaigns, he said the war would end in 24 hours. Of course, that was theoretical, but practically, he's the only one leader at this moment who has tried to bring this war to an end. So even though European Union and Ukraine feel that he will not be a good mediator, maybe because he will push for a peace deal that favors Putin and Russia, at the end of the day, someone has to be the sober person that brings the world to order. And I think Trump has learned he's the right guy for that, and he's taking advantage. And this war thing will end. Whether Ukraine wants it, whether European Union supports it or not, it's going to end. In terms of funding disbursed to Ukraine, Trump said that the United States so far has spent $200 billion more than Europe. So he doesn't understand why Europe is complaining about U.S. pulling out of this thing and stopping the funding. Yet so far, they have put in more money as the U.S. So in essence, U.S. has a bigger share in this in terms of decision-making, in my opinion, again, because if you are logical and think about it, if you put in more resources, what does it mean? Then you have an upper hand in negotiating. Hence why this meeting in Saudi Arabia excluded both Ukraine and European Union. And I feel either way, these peace deals will go on. So what are the possible solutions or outcomes of all this? This is now things out there that people are looking at, and I also feel that it is a possibility. Let's begin. For Russia, the battle is for more land and resources. That's why they went for this war. So essentially, they've already conquered a few lands. So what is for sure certain is that there might be an end to this end of this conflict, but the lands that they have conquered, those ones are not going back to Ukraine at all, because again, Russia looks at it as taking back what was theirs, because you remember initially it was one piece before the whole division came. So for them, that will not, they won't return that land. Number two, Putin, he will not surrender that land, of course. And for him, it's about making sure he becomes like he has a lifetime achievement, and basically Russia will never forget President Putin. Why? Because if they're able to hold this land and never give it back, even if 100 years from now, everyone in history, he will go down in history as the president who ensured Russia got back what belongs to them. So Russia picked land, of course, for another reason. The lands that were picked were to act as buffer zones. So in case of an attack, in case of war, they are sure they can have their army bases in this area. And also it makes, Russia is the biggest country in the world. So they have a bigger buffer zone in case of an attack, and in case maybe the world goes to World War III. So that, of course, is one of the reasons. So Trump, on the other hand, had said he's interested in minerals in Ukraine, and there was actually an agreed sort of agreement with President Zelensky, but this has not come to pass. So the question is, and this is something we are all watching to see, these two leaders, Trump and Putin, must have sat together and agreed on deals. The big question here is what has Trump been promised, so he can agree to side with Putin. That's something we watch out for. Number two, I'm sure even for Putin, he asked for things, maybe kill the sanctions. And that, for me, I feel is one of the big things, because at the end of the day, Russia is interested in business. If you're able to trade with European Union, it means money comes to Russia because they have gas. So what do they do with all this gas if they can't trade? So that's something that I feel must have been part of the discussion. The other thing that is very, very, very key is that Russia will not sign any agreement or even official document with President Zelensky. And hear me, this is why. Russia does not consider President Zelensky as an official or rather a legitimate president. According to Russia, he's illegitimate. So the only person maybe they can sign a deal with is probably through parliament and if they go through elections. So these deals, of course, may be signed towards later this year, not now. But certainly, they're not putting pen to paper with Zelensky. And that, of course, gives them an upper hand because now it's a dictatorship. And already you can see President Trump said this guy is a dictator and he's not elected. So already those two are pushing that agenda. Now, for Ukraine, non-negotiable that will go is that there is no NATO status. That one, I can guarantee you Russia will not agree to sign anything, or even if it's unofficial, they're not putting that in anywhere in the agreement. Joining NATO, that has to be forgotten. How will they convince EU on the NATO influence? that is something to watch out for. I would be interested to know, actually, and it will be very interesting how EU comes after this week, maybe moving forward into next week. For EU, what does this mean? It means EU will lose because if maybe the sanctions are lifted, now they can trade. So the money that EU holds, of course, goes to Russia, and business goes on. And number 3, resources. If they decide, for instance, to invest in the war, they will lose so much resources. As you can see already, Trump is complaining. So it will be a loss to them. And if for real, US decides we are done, I don't think European Union will push to that. And why that, I feel they may not follow that, is because it will show that they have a weak ideology, because essentially, what are they fighting for? Like, why would they be at war? Essentially, nothing. So what's next for EU? Then would it mean that there will be a civil war in Ukraine? If a civil war breaks out, for what value? So you see, all these factors put together is something that's very interesting to watch. And basically, the lessons I have learned, in politics, there's no enmity. So you see, we were looking at the US as the guys who were funding the war in Ukraine. Yes, they were funding, but change of presidency, what happens? The country that was funding is now working with what was looked as an enemy, which is Russia. So, and something else that, in my opinion, I feel, and I can stand by, these are 2 big boys of the world. We just have to accept it. Russia is among the big boys. US is a big boy, and we have to accept that and live by it. And for Ukraine, maybe it's time to learn when it's time to know when to dance and when to get off stage. I feel like people have died. This is the moment you go and look for peace rather than pushing for things that don't add value. Yeah, so share with us what you think about this whole event. Thank you for watching Geopolitics 411, and of course, we shall catch you on the next episode.